Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back. Today we are finishing our 4-part series on Ruth. We're going to be in Ruth 4. Ruth 4 reads like one consecutive story, so there's going to be less scripture chunks, even though there's still a lot of verses. So I'm sorry in advance if some of it gets a bit long, but let's hop right in with verses 1 through 8 saying, "Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat down there just as the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along. Boaz said, 'Come over here, my friend, and sit down.' So he went over and sat down. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, 'Sit here.' And they did so. Then he said to the guardian redeemer, 'Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here, in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me, so I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and I am next in line. I will redeem it,' he said. Then Boaz said, 'On the day you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property.' And this the guardian redeemer said, 'Then I cannot redeem it because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself, I cannot do it.' Now in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off its sandal and gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. So the guardian redeemer said to Boaz, 'Buy it yourself,' and removed his sandal." So as I brought up in my video on Ruth 2, which you should watch if you haven't already, it is a almost chalked up to coincidence throughout the book of Ruth, everything that has happened. So it is a coincidence that Boaz went to the city, sat down, the other guardian redeemer happened to walk by, the other 10 elders happened to be in the area. The guardian redeemer happened not to be able to marry Ruth because it would affect his property, which happened to make Boaz next in line to marry Ruth. And so it's just this sequence of events that just so happened to happen in this exact way so that Boaz would marry Ruth in the next bit. But also, we see that the other guardian redeemer wasn't as loyal or faithful as Boaz was to his promise as a guardian redeemer. He was too worried about his own estate and his own affairs, which is okay, but he wasn't as faithful as Ruth was to Naomi, as Naomi was to Ruth, as Boaz was to Ruth and Naomi, and all of the characters are faithful and loyal to each other throughout this entire book, and we see here that this guardian redeemer is not. And so that sets the stage for Boaz in verses 9 and 10. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, 'Today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. Today you are witnesses.'" So Boaz says this to make sure that everyone is a witness and saw, and this transaction is legal and binding, and that Boaz now has acquired all of Elimelech, Kilion, and Mahlon's land. And so he also, claims Ruth as his wife because it was Mahlon's wife. And it shows here that it was a noble thing of him to do and a loyal thing of him to do, even to the dead, that now their name will remain in their hometown, in their home country, and on that land because Ruth was still married to Mahlon. So their family line, by association, will still carry on through Boaz and Ruth. And so it's beautiful the way Boaz puts it here, talking about not how he's just going to acquire the land, but now that he will acquire it within Mahlon's name and continue his name and his legacy through Ruth. And then we see in verses 11 and 12, Then the elders and all the people at the gate said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and to be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by his young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." So the crowd here wishes Boaz well, and they wish blessings and good tidings on him and his family and generations of their family, which is a huge deal. And throughout this, they make two major historical references for their time. They reference Rachel and Leah, who are the wives of Jacob and first mothers of Israel, and later led to the entire nation of Israel. And then the second one is a bit more on the nose, but it's Judah's wife, Tamar, who bore Perez, and Judah being one of the sons of Joseph, who was prophesied to eventually give birth to the Messiah. And so they are wishing him good things and that his family is important and blessed. And both of these were once again prophesied to give birth to the Messiah, which is some light foreshadowing throughout the rest of the book. But we continue it in verses 13 through 15, saying, "So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, 'Praise be the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given birth.'" So this is our happily ever after. Ruth and Boaz get married. They have a kid. Naomi will be fine in her old age. They were all faithful and loved each other and cared about each other. And overall, Ruth's loyalty to Naomi ended up proving so useful and so well rewarded. And the Lord rewarded them for all of this. And then we finish out in verses 16 through 22 saying, "Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, 'Naomi has a son,' and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. This, then, is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron was the father of Ram. Ram, the father of Aminadab. Aminadab, the father of Nahshon. Nahshon, the father of Salmon. Salmon, the father of Boaz. Boaz, the father of Obed. Obed, the father of Jesse. And Jesse, the father of David." So these are the verses that close off the chapter, and they just tell us Ruth's lineage, Ruth and Boaz's descendants, all the way up to David. So first of all, it introduces a new character, Obed. So I gotta pull back up the name chart. Obed means servant of God. So Ruth and Naomi gave birth to a servant of God because they were both faithful and loyal followers of God. And then we see their lineage, which I took the liberty of going to Matthew 1 and getting a more full lineage of Abraham to Isaac to Jacob to Judah to Perez to Hezron to Ram to Aminadab to Nahshon to Salmon, who married Rahab and gave birth to Boaz, who married Ruth, who gave birth to Obed, to Jesse, to David, to Solomon, to Rehoboam, to Abijah, to Asha, to Jehoshaphat, to Jehoram, to Uzziah, to Jotham, to Ahaz, to Hezekiah, to Manasseh, to Amon, to Josiah, to Jeconiah, to Shealtiel, to Zerubbabel, to Abihud, to Elimakim, to Azor, to Zadok, to Achim, to Elihud, to Eleazar, to Matthan, to Jacob, to Joseph, who married Mary and gave birth to Jesus. So that is a lot of names. But it just shows that Ruth, by her faithfulness to Naomi and to Boaz and to everything they did, they not only gave birth to a son who was in the line of King David, but also was directly in the line of Jesus. They were a stepping stone on the long line from Abraham to Jesus to fulfill God's promise to save humanity. And so the book of Ruth doesn't directly show a bunch of God's work. It, like I said, chalks most things up to coincidence. But it's obvious that God is orchestrating these divine events so that everything will happen just as he intends and plans, so that things like this will happen, where it eventually leads to Jesus. This was God's plan working even when the world doesn't show it. And so even when Naomi tried to change her name to Mara, or Scarred by God, I'm going to bring back up the name chart, he still had a plan for her and still had a promise for her. And so we see God working behind the scenes the whole time throughout this book. And that is all for Ruth. It is a beautiful book about loyalty and faithfulness, and the faithfulness of God to us, the faithfulness of us to each other, the faithfulness of mother and daughter, the faithfulness of husband and bride, and just faith in general, having faith that God will provide and will help us in our circumstances. But that is all for today. I'm hoping to start a series on Luke that will take us from Christmas to Easter, coming out Tuesday. And I guess I'll see y'all then. Have a good one.